together. So today's session is going to be presented by Linda Grayson. She is a Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Compliance and Enforcement. Is that right? Enforcement and Investigation, and Karen Gentis, who is also with that bureau and is now working on RFS and financial assurance. Yay, team! And the team is up front, and she's going to introduce them to you. I want to remind everybody, how many of you guys you are signed up for the listserv and get listserv messages? Raise your hands. Everybody's nodding. That's the most ever, so that's great. Everybody in the room and hopefully all you people on the web will do that too. You get important messages and information. We're going to be planning other training sessions. A lot is coming this fall. Go to the SRP webpage under Tools and Training and see what we're going to be offering in the fall. We're going to wait till the end of the presentation to ask questions. We'll have microphones. We'll come around and get your question on the microphone so the people on the webinar can hear you. And we'll do our best to answer as many questions from the web as well. And when we get started, I want to welcome Dan Toder from the LSRPA, who's going to help sponsor the pretzels and potato chips that are here. Now all the webinar people are jealous. They wish they had them. So he's going to come on up and talk about the LSRPA a little bit.
Thank you, Jess. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to cyberspace participants as well. I'll get out of the way fast here. I just want to let everybody know in the LSRP world that the LSRPA is putting on some events in the very near future. Before I do that, though, the pretzels and chips and whatever we have to refresh you and quench your thirst is provided by the sponsors that sponsor the LSRPA. We have about 15 or 16 of them now. I'm going to let this slide speak for itself because they're too numerous to mention here. So we thank them. We also, as I always say, taking revenue from the courses that we put on. And the next slide will show you some of the ones coming up in October. We have an ethics class. I don't know if everybody can get in because you've got to be ethical to participate. But that's coming up quickly on October 22nd. You have to travel for it, though, if you're from the north. It's down at the Burlington County College. The LSRPs will have 7 continuing education credits for the course, and it's a real big course. We're all in the midst, the LSRPs are in the midst of taking their exams right now. The first 2 have been given already, and 2 more coming up, and the third one is coming up on November 15th. So that means we have an exam review course scheduled, which is coming up on October 30th. And we change it to some extent each time to try to adapt to the last test that was given. So as we learn our lessons through taking these tests, we sort of tailor the questions a little bit more to the point. Okay, we have a business practice seminar coming up in December, and there we're going to talk about the LSRP's liability, insurance that's out there that we can buy, and contract language that you may want to consider for contracts when you are providing services to your clients. And January 3rd, another exam, that's the last one for a while. The LSRP has annual meeting, and then for 2013, we're planning to put on at least 4 courses of a technical nature so that the LSRPs can continue to get continuing education credits. Will probably be technical in nature. Organizations such as the National Groundwater Association has courses already approved. We're just going to bring them in so that the LSRPs can attend the courses, learn what they're all about, and also get the credits for their license renewal on the second go-around. So that's what we're planning. And just to let you know that our association is working for the LSRPs and all its members, and we appreciate the support. I'm sure the session's going to be great. We're all going to learn about financial stuff, and we have the experts here to tell you all about it. Tess, coming up, Linda Grayson will talk to you about RFS. Right?
Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk about remediation funding sources and financial assurance. A couple of sort of housekeeping things. For the webinar people, there was an error on I think it's maybe the fourth to the last slide that has contact information. Everybody was here, it was corrected for your handouts, but for the webinar people who got this in advance, the phone number listed for me is incorrect. Should be 609-633-1464. There's one other thing that I need to tell you about, and I will when we get there. The corrected version will be up on the website for those webinar people who can just refer to that when we're finished. Okay, today I'm just going to give sort of some introductory information and then turn it over to Karen for the details. What we're going to talk about today is general information about remediation funding sources and financial assurance. Go through the process, what needs to be submitted, how you establish remediation funding source, who needs to establish, what the exemptions are, basically everything you wanted to know about that. Also, we're going to cover the remediation funding source surcharge. Process for changing the amount of your surcharge, whether that's through disbursements or because the estimated cost of the cleanup has changed. We're going to talk about the same processes that apply for financial assurance. We're going to talk about the process of moving from a remediation funding source to a financial assurance mechanism, and then we'll have time for questions. We're assuming that everybody here has a basic understanding of the remediation process. This isn't, sort of a 101 class, but with regard to financial assurance and remediation funding sources, I think that it's probably fair to say that even people who have been in the business for a while from a technical standpoint maybe haven't dealt with this before. So we're going to hold your hand and go through this. Okay. One question that seems to come up all the time, and it usually presents itself in the form of a voicemail that says, I have a question about remediation funding source, and when I call the person back, the question really isn't about remediation funding source, it's about financial assurance. So there seems to be a basic lack of understanding that there is a difference between these two. So I'm just going to start there with the basics. Purpose of remediation funding source is to assure that funds exist to complete remediation. And the purpose of a financial assurance mechanism is to ensure that funds exist for long-term O&M of an engineering control. So they're similar but not the same, and the terms were chosen to distinguish between them. One thing that you might want to know, if you're working on an old case that has an administrative consent order, before there was such a thing as remediation funding sources, it was called financial assurance. So it was financial assurance, remediation funding source, and now financial assurance comes back into the picture. So if you're dealing with an old case, you might actually be, if you're reading that oversight document, it might confuse you because it will refer to what is really a remediation funding source as financial assurance. So I hope I didn't just confuse everyone by saying that. Okay, so some differences between RFS and FA. Remediation funding sources for ongoing remediation, whereas financial assurance is for O&M of an engineering control. There's a 1% surcharge on a remediation funding source, but there's no surcharge on a financial assurance mechanism. Remediation funding source can be tapped to fund the remediation. Those funds, certain types can be used to actually fund the remediation, whereas financial assurance cannot. You can use a self-guarantee if you meet the requirements to meet remediation funding source requirements, but you cannot use a self-guarantee to meet financial assurance requirements. And there are exemptions to each, and those exemptions differ. So we're going to get into those a little bit. So starting with remediation funding sources. Parties who must establish them include parties who executed an administrative consent order or a remediation funding or a remediation agreement with the department where those documents require the establishment of that. So that's just sort of a general, like, subset. ISRA parties, ISRA subject cases need a remediation funding source if they're going to sell the property prior to the completion of the cleanup or upon the approval of a remedial action work plan. So for the most part, what we see as new mechanisms being established, they're mostly on, at this point, ISRA cases. In addition to that, anybody who receives a directive or an administrative order. And there are some exemptions here on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go into those because Karen's going to go into those in detail. Some other related questions that frequently come up. The rules allow for a party to post a remediation funding source on behalf of somebody else. So that's something that can happen. The only exception is someone can't self-guarantee for someone else. That's the only one that's not an option. If multiple parties are obligated to post a remediation funding source and one party is exempt, the parties who are not have to post the full amount. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Karen because, as I said, she's going to go over the exemptions. She's going to review the process to establish. She's going to go through the forms and everything, and she's going to first introduce the staff so you can put some faces with the names. So, Karen?
Thank you, Linda. So, my name is Karen Gentis, and I'm a supervisor of the RFS unit. And first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about karma. So, some of you know that before I started doing this a couple of months ago, I wrote rules. I sat at my desk, nobody called me, it was great. And part of the rules, subchapter 5 of the ARCS rules, talks about remediation funding source. And I'll confess, I really didn't pay attention to it. I thought, man, this stupid money is so boring, I'm not reading this. So I read it, but I didn't really understand it. So now here I am, karma's biting me in the butt because I'm the supervisor of this RFS unit, and I have to deal with this every day. And what prompted me to suggest that we have this hot topic session is because now I get lots of phone calls, and I get lots of emails, and I get lots of snail mail with people asking about different questions about the RFS process and about the financial assurance process. And I will admit, especially now that everything is changing with the LSRPs coming, doing much more than they used to have to do, and have to know a lot more about this stuff. And maybe like you, before this, LSRPs skipped subchapter 5 or skimmed subchapter 5, but now you have to know it. So I thought maybe this would be a good idea to have this session. Frankly, it's because stop calling me. I'll be learning everything that you need to know. And no, really, I love it all. First of all, I love it all, I'm sure. So, as I said, I was a little not that knowledgeable about the RFS process. Now I've read the rules. I read them every day, at least once a day. And but in fact, I still need a lot of support in working through the process. So I know you guys have or will contact some of the RFS staff during the course of your dealings with the department. Like Linda said, I wanted to be able to have you put a face to the name. So I'd like to introduce the fabulous staff, you know, they say behind every great woman are some more great women who will make you look good, and that's this crew. And I'd like them to stand up so you know who they are. So first we have the awesome Audrey Williams. And Audrey does surcharge checks, she does the annual verification, and she does the self-guarantee application. Next we have the incredible Comfort Calker. Comfort does these remediation certifications, and she does all things RFS except the things that Audrey does. We have the genius, Gina Tonti. She is our liaison with IT, aside from not knowing a lot of support when it comes to RFS stuff. You guys are I can't see this, but I am old, and I don't know much about computer stuff, so I need Gina to help me out, back me up on that. And finally, we have the sensational Shauna Baldwin. She is our secretary for the unit. Also, Austin does an awesome job, keeps us so organized and moving along. Now let's get into the actual nitty-gritty. We're talking mostly about kind of process and day-to-day details for what you have to know about RFS. Lynn's going to go into a little bit more about what you have to know for financial assurance. A different unit actually deals with the financial assurance aspect of it, and hopefully somebody might know it will be here shortly in case you have questions that we can't answer about that. So when you are going to submit your RFS package, we want to make sure that what you submit is a complete package. We don't always get a complete package. Like Linda was saying, most of the cases currently, most of the RFS cases are ISRA cases. I think this is going to change a little bit in the future. I believe more directives and administrative orders are going to be requiring RFS, but the process is basically the same. But since most of you, I think, currently are dealing with ISRA cases, that's sort of going to be the frame of reference for this discussion. So a complete RFS package, and if it's an ISRA case, and if it's your initial submission, meaning this is the first submission you're writing after the ISRA trigger that got you into the program. There might have been other ISRA triggers prior to this, but this is your particular ISRA trigger. And again, when I say very generically, I know there's LSRPs here. I don't know if there's people representing RPs. I should have asked what various people represent. But the initial trigger, after the initial trigger, the complete package includes, or has to include, the remediation certification form, the remediation cost review and RFS FA form, and then we need the original RFS instrument. So the RFS instruments are maybe a remediation trust fund document, or a letter of credit, a line of credit, an insurance policy, an environmental insurance policy. There's also self-guarantees that's sort of in a category by itself. But we need the original. And also, at the end of the, we have model documents on the web for these various instruments. And what the person who is either your bank or an attorney maybe is going to be your trustee if it's a trust fund, they have to follow the format in this model document. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have slides that has all of our contact information, everybody's phone number, email address, and it's also going to have websites where you can find forms and these model documents. The last page of these model documents contains certification. And there's some confusion about the certification, but that has to be signed by the person who is required to establish the RFS. Also, very important is to make sure that you include your 1% surcharge check. We're going to talk about this in more detail later on. The statute requires us to collect a 1% surcharge on all RFS except for self-guarantees. Next slide, Joe. Now, I was talking about that certification and how there's confusion. Because it's at the end of this document, the instrument, a lot of times the banks think they need to sign it, or the trustee thinks they need to sign it, or nobody signs it. But it has to be signed by the person who is required to establish the RFS. I suggest that whoever, like if it's the RP, the person responsible for remediation, or if you guys as LSRPs helping them out, or whoever you are helping them out, separate that page. That's probably the easiest thing to do. Give the bank or the trustee the actual instrument, and then the person responsible for establishing the RFS signs the certification, and you can sort that with, it has to be included in the package. I think that's all for that. Okay, so as Linda said, there are some exemptions to requirements to establish RFS. The rules have certain exemptions. And I'm really going to focus on two of them. I will say generally, people ask if maybe part of your site meets one of the exemptions, but the exemption doesn't apply to the whole site. If any part of your site does not meet the exemption criteria, you still have to establish RFS for that portion of the site. The only exemption would apply to the portion of the site that meets the exemption criteria. So for example, if you're cleaning up, if you have a site with 10 AOCs and you're cleaning up 7 of them to an unrestricted use level, you don't have to post RFS for those 7 sites. But if 3 remaining sites are going to be cleaned up to what's restricted, then you do have to post RFS for those sites. Another change that's coming up is we are requiring you to indicate that you're claiming an exemption on the form, on the cost review form. I'm going to shorten that very long named form, Remediation Cost Review and RFS FA form. I'm just going to talk about it as a cost review form. On the cost review form, we're changing it, and this probably will be posted tomorrow or Monday, where there's going to be checkoff boxes if you're claiming an exemption. We have to know that you're claiming an exemption. We have to have that in our system. Otherwise, we're going to be chasing down the person who has to establish it. Where is your RFS? We don't know that they've claimed an exemption unless it's on the form. The form will indicate, actually, let's go to the next page. So this is how the form is going to look. Instead of those dots, there's going to be checkoff boxes. I also have to tell you this. I learned all kinds of new things about making PowerPoint presentations for this. Like I learned how to do these screenshots and make big circles around things. But the one thing I don't know is how to make check boxes, so I put bullets there. But on the actual form, there will be boxes, and I check off what exemption is being claimed. So that's a little different. You have to now submit the form even if you're claiming an exemption. And then if you are claiming an exemption, then you don't have to fill out sections C through G of the form. You get to this is a section B, and then you're going to skip right to section H and complete the rest. And H, I, and J are all the certifications that the LSRP and the RP, or the person responsible for conducting remediation, have to sign. Next slide. I'm going to highlight 2 of the exemptions. One is the exemption for sites that are in an environmental opportunity zone. So the legislature, there is an Environmental Opportunity Zone Act, and this allows for 2 things, or exempts people from 2 things. If your site is in an environmental opportunity zone area, you don't have to post RFS, and also you get a tax break. To me, that seems like a bigger deal. So I think it's important to know that your site is in an environmental opportunity zone. If you check off that you're claiming the EOZ exemption on the form, we want you to submit some backup. So in other words, you would have to submit either a copy of the municipal ordinance establishing the site as an environmental opportunity zone, or the ordinance number and date that the ordinance is passed. And it's, again, I think the big part of this environmental opportunity zone would be that you're going to get a tax break. So the tax, the statute, tax part of the statutes says that you have to submit a copy of, it has a form, you have to fill out the form, and it requires you to name the ordinance. So you're going to have this information anyway. So we want to see that information as well. I have to put on my glasses. That's what people out on the web. I put on my glasses. Okay, next slide. The other exemption I want to talk about is for sites that use an innovative technology as part of the remedial action. Again, the exemption only applies to the part of the site that you're using this innovative technology on. We don't have a list of innovative technologies. I believe ITRC has some listing of technologies that they might consider that might help as innovative, that might help you. But we need you to put some supporting documentation attached to the form saying why this remedial action is using innovative technology. Okay. So we talked about the initial submissions, and what the package would be that for the initial submission for ISRA, you have to include the remediation certification. We want the original instrument, and then these are the time frames by which this package has to be submitted. For ISRA sites, it's either within 14 days after the LSRP certifies a remedial action work plan or upon the submission of the remediation certification. And then for the non-ISRA sites, it's as directed in the order of the directive. Next slide. Okay, so here's the form, and there's sometimes some questions as to how the form needs to be completed. So what we want to focus on here, we're going to talk about Section A, because that's just basic site information. B is the person responsible for conducting remediation information, and it is also going to, this is an older version, but it will also have the exemption checkboxes like we just talked about. So I'm going to go over filling out parts of the form B, C, D, and E. And in my scenario, I am pretending I am an LSRP, and the case my client has is it's an ISRA site. It is the initial submission. It is a case where we don't have any environmental information on the site, but they have to submit the remediation certification in a very short time period because of some business transaction. Maybe they have to close in 2 days. You don't have time to get that site. And what happens in that case, if you don't have the information to make a good cost estimate for remediating the site? And in my site, we're using a remediation trust fund as a financial instrument. Okay, so, sorry, Joe, go back one. Anyway, so at the bottom of this slide, you can see that if it's either the initial remediation funding source, you want to check this, or the same thing applies for if it's your first time submitting your financial assurance for your permit, then you're going to use these boxes. Okay, next slide. And then Section B talks about what in the right-hand column, it talks about initial existing mechanisms. That's, like I said, we're using a fully funded trust. The only time you would use the left-hand column is if you were switching your RFS. Maybe you have a remediation trust fund and you want to use a line of credit. Then you would fill out the left-hand side of the block there. But like I said, here we have a fully funded trust fund, fully funded trust. Okay, and now we're looking at the bottom of the screen, numbers 1 and 2. Like I said, this is a site where we don't have a lot of environmental information, and so the department has established surrogate amounts in that scenario. The surrogate amounts are $100,000 if there's no groundwater contamination suspected. So you would post $100,000. If there is groundwater contamination suspected, the surrogate amount is $250,000. In this case, we think there's only soil contamination, so we're going to post $100,000. And the expiration date is 1 year after the posting of the document. So let's say the closing was today, and we established the trust fund today, and so in October 11, 2013 is the date that it will expire. Okay, next slide. Now Section E, and this talks about what method the LSRP used to do the cost estimate, and obviously it says check all that apply. And in our case, like I said, we're using the surrogate, so we want to check off other towards the bottom of the slide. And we want to specify that the PASI is not complete, so we're using surrogate. Again, this way we know we can keep a record of that, and we know that the reason it's $100,000 is because you're using the surrogate. And then we'll also expect, because if you use a surrogate, the rule requires that 30 days after you complete your PASI, you have to submit the form, the cost review form again, with the actual cost estimate. And that's very important. So we're going to be tracking that to make sure that within the correct time frames you've completed the PASI and you have submitted the actual cost estimate. All right, so just to recap, if it's an ISRA case, what the initial submission is going to be the remediation certification. the remediation cost review and RFS form, the original RFS instrument, the certification that goes along with that instrument, and a 1% surcharge check. If it's not an issue case, then just take out the remediation certification. Everything else still has to be submitted. Next slide. So those were for initial submissions. For subsequent, the rules require that every year you submit the cost estimate form, and so it has to be updated and submitted every year, and that would be on the anniversary date that the form was supposed to be initially submitted. And it requires a detailed cost estimate. So that would be a summary of all money that was spent to date and an estimate of the cost it's going to take to complete the remediation of the site. Next slide. All right, now we're going to get into the 1% RFS surcharge. There's a little bit of confusion sometimes about this as well. Again, if you have a self-guarantee, you don't have to do the surcharge, and if it's a financial assurance, you don't have to pay the surcharge. Everybody else has to pay to the 1% surcharge. And I did fix that. Okay, so it's 1% of the amount that needs to be posted. That's on the cost estimate as to what the cost of the remediation is going to be. Oh, let me just mention that the statute, the Brownfields Act, requires us to assess this 1% surcharge. And the statute also requires that this money goes into the Remediation Guarantee Fund. And the Remediation Guarantee Fund is a fund that was established for the department to remediate any contaminated site where the person responsible for conducting remediation fails to conduct or properly conduct remediation. The money can also be dispersed by the department as technical assistance grants to nonprofit groups to assist them in evaluating remediation methods and monitor site conditions at specific sites of public concern in the local community. You probably don't know that I just read that directly from the Brownfields Act. I know it sounded so natural, like it was tripping off my tongue. So now we know what the Remediation Guarantee Fund is for. Now, next slide. What is it 1% of? This sometimes causes people problems. Many of these remediation funding source instruments are interest-bearing accounts. So maybe the LSRP has estimated that there should be $200,000 in the remediation funding source. Over the years, it builds up. I have to say, I don't think this is much of a problem now because interest rates are low, but some accounts have more than what is required to be posted for the RFS. We don't want 1% of that. All we want is 1% of the corpus of the RFS, of what's required to be posted for the remediation of the site. Another thing that comes up kind of often is, can you use the RFS to pay for a 1% surcharge, and you cannot. That would defeat the purpose of the surcharge, of the RFS. The RFS is there to make sure that there's enough money based on an estimate from the LSRP to cover the cost of remediation. If you're paying every year 1% of that as your surcharge, you're going to have to just increase the amount of the RFS or be a violation of the rules. So make that very clear. You cannot use the surcharge amount to pay for the RFS. Now, if it's an account that's been sitting there for a while and there's a lot of interest that's accrued and you want to use the interest to pay the 1% surcharge, that's allowed. The department really isn't interested in the amount above what's required to be established to complete the remediation of the site. Next slide. Okay, this is going to be my favorite part, and yours too, because it's a pop quiz. And this is where I get to rant a little bit. All right, so the question is, and you people out there in webinar land, they can type in their response, right? Can they, Joe? He has it turned off, so you can't play. Only these people can. The question is, what is the most important thing to remember when submitting your surcharge check, or when you're submitting any document to us, including any financial instrument, even any letter, anything? What is the most important thing about submitting these documents? All right, let's give them one hint. Click it once. Click. Come on. There we go. The answer to this was a listserv message that was sent on October 2nd. Think back, October 2nd, you all got a listserv message. I know you all wait by your computers. Listserv message. It was in there. Anybody? What?
The answers are in your handout.
Well, you know what? I'm sorry. All right, well, anybody want to look good and tell me what it is? It could be, George. Thank you for playing. If I had a present, I would give it to you. Yes, the most important thing, besides the money being there, is that you have to have some sort of a DEP identifier on there, either the PI number or the issue case number. The issue case number always starts with an E. Put it on even if you have to write it in yourself, on the instrument, on the check. We have to know where to apply these, the money that's coming in. You wouldn't believe how big a problem it is, but I'll tell you how big a problem it is. I asked Shauna to track how much mail we got in September. And in September, we got 259 pieces of mail, and that's checks, that's remediation certifications, RFS packages. It's a combination of all that. 259 pieces of mail. Imagine they don't have any identifier on them. We have to call and figure out where it goes. Now, we have about 1,200 cases with RFS, and we get these documents with no identifier. Where do we apply it? So in order to process it, we have to have some sort of a PI number or an issue case number. So I'll share a little personal information. I was going to put this slide up, but then I realized maybe I don't want my personal information up there to all you people I don't know. I just paid my real estate taxes. On the check, which of course has my name and address on it, I wrote my lot and block number. I wrote my parcel number. I wrote my account number, and I wrote for what the check was to be used. Council Rock collects this, as Scott knows. Let's look at him. So this way, there's no question what Greg Soto, my tax collector, is going to do with that check. Next slide. Now it does it. Okay. All right. So this is just an example of something that we get in the mail. I love the name of this bank, the Svenska Handelsbanken Bank, and I don't know if anybody watching this is one of your sites. If it is, I'm not using it to mock you. I'm using it as an example so that everyone can benefit from this. All right. As you can see, it is for, and Tessa makes me do this, $1 million. To me, that's a lot of money. So now we got this $1 million letter of credit. We have no idea, none, where does it go. But you might be thinking, Karen, you've been a bureaucrat. It says right there, it goes to APM Terminals, North America. Just look that up on NGEMS. Okay, that's what I tried first. Next slide. On NGEMS, this is what comes up. It comes up as an air case, and it comes up as a pollution prevention case. No SRP, make a few phone calls. Nope, not ours, not ours. It took hours to determine. It was actually for some sort of an UST financial days. That's right, Comfort days to determine that it's for some. It was an UST financial assurance case. It wasn't even one of the RFS people's. So I think I'm done with my rants. Let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to yell at you about. The other thing was on that October 2nd listserv message, one of the things we said, and what I'll be reviewing is, start November 1st, if we get documents that don't have an identifier on it, a PI number or an issue case number, we're sending them back, because we cannot take the time, the hours, the days it takes to properly apply this, and this might result in some non-compliance. Okay, I feel better now. I hope you all do too. All right. So far, what did we cover? We covered what constitutes a full RFS package. Important to know, we want the full package when it comes in. What you need for your initial submission, what you need for your subsequent submissions, when you have to submit it, how to fill out the forms, and we talked about the 1% surcharge. Now, in addition to establishing your RFS, the RFS can change over time. The amount of money in the RFS can change over time. And for basically 3 different reasons. Either it's going to be dispersed. Let me also stop myself and say that there's a lot of confusion just between the nomenclature of the different ways that the RFS money can be taken, that the RFS can be decreased or increased. So I want everybody to sort of get used to using the proper nomenclature so that when you call us, we know what you're talking about. So it can be dispersed. Dispersed means you're using the money to pay for remediation. It can be decreased, and in some cases it has to be increased based on new cost estimates. And it can be returned after an RAO is issued. And an RFS may also be returned. One instrument may be returned even before the RAO is issued if you're going to switch it out for another instrument. So in other words, you have a remediation trust fund and you want to switch it to a letter of credit or return. We'll make sure that the trust fund is done away with, but you'll still have RFS in the form of a letter of credit. Okay, next slide. So when the money is dispersed, we have to know about it. And you have to submit the cost review form. And I know I never really said this before, but you need to put the identifier on the form. You absolutely have to know what the disbursement, what case it's from, and you have to know the amount of the amount being requested for disbursement. And it has to be certified by both the LSRP and the person responsible for conducting the remediation. Next slide. Now, to whom does this request to disperse the money, to whom should it be made? This depends on the type of instrument that you are using. So if it's a remediation trust fund or a line of credit, the LSRP is authorized to, or the LSRP can authorize the bank or the trustee to disperse the money. Next slide. Now, the only way that can happen, though, is if the if the RFS instrument, if the financial instrument has a paragraph in there from the model document that says to the bank or to the trustee, the LSRP is allowed to authorize disbursements. So it used to be that the department, before the LSRP program was in full swing, the department would have to authorize all disbursements. But to make it go quicker, people can get their money quicker, the LSRPs can authorize that. But the bank has to know that, or the trustee has to know that, otherwise they will not authorize the disbursement on the LSRP say so. So back in September or the fall of 2009, we changed all our model documents to include this paragraph, and so that's 3 years ago, so hopefully everybody has the correct instrument, the correct form of the instrument. If not, I recommend that you or you tell your clients do this sooner rather than later, because otherwise it's going to hold up dispersing the money until this the model is changed, because we're not doing it anymore. And we have to copy the department on the request, and this is so that we know that we have to change in our database the amount of money that's still in the RFS. Again, it has to do with a couple of things, one of them being how much you're going to be billed for the 1% surcharge. And it has to be within 30 days of any changes of the notice of disbursement on the form. And it also, the rules require that it only be done every 3 months. You can't do it more often than every 3 months. Next slide. Okay, so like I said, an LSRP can authorize disbursement if it's a remediation trust fund or if it's a line of credit. But if it's a letter of credit or an environmental insurance policy, the department still has to authorize the disbursements. And that's because there can only be one beneficiary on these instruments, and that's going to be the department. And it's not like you can write a check for those. It's just much more complicated, so that it's not really our doing, it's the financial community's rules that say that we have to be the ones that authorize the disbursement of money. These types of instruments are meant to be sort of working funds, put up that we know the money is there. It doesn't mean that there's really money there on like a trust fund, but there might be actual funds available. Okay, next slide. All right, so I have to fill out Section G is the disbursement section on the form. And so this is just an example. You have to say the date the previous request was made. So in my example, it's March 10th, 2010, and the amount that's requested to be disbursed in my example is $7,000. And I'll give you another pop quiz because that one, and this one I don't think the answer is on the slide. So try to figure this out. Can the LSRPA, if it's one that has to go to the department, authorize this disbursement? And I'll give you a hint, it's based on the date. Was done, the last one was March 10th, 2012. You can only do it every 3 months. Let's get the fingers rolling. March, April, May. Okay, we're good. It's only every 3 months so that the LSRP, or in the case of a letter of credit or an environmental insurance policy, the department can authorize disbursement. Then Section 3 is you're going to put in the names of the parties who are going to receive the money. 4 is you have to include a detailed description of what the money either was used for or is going to be used for. Now, I just put it as an example, installing 12 wells at $200 per well. You can tell I will never, ever pay for a well. I haven't a clue. Am I anywhere in the ballpark? No. Okay. And then you have to say how much it's going to cost, the remaining costs will be. Now, this detailed description, it's in the instructions, and it describes it has to be pretty detailed. I mean, I just made this up because, just as an example so we can move forward. But, as I said, when you look at the instructions, you'll see what type of information you have to include to justify this disbursement. Okay, next. Okay, so that was dispersing money to pay for remediation. And now we're going to talk about how you can increase or decrease your RFS. So let's talk about decrease first. And again, I just want to clarify that a decrease is different than a disbursement. Decrease means that the LSRP has done another cost estimate and realizes that it's going to cost less to remediate the site than when it was initially, because I'm buying the wells at $200 a pop, so it's going to cost less to complete the remediation than initially what was on the last form. So you can decrease the RFS. In order to have the decrease, you have to submit the form, and you have to let us know how much is going to be in the RFS. It has to be certified by the LSRP and by the person responsible for conducting remediation. We're going to be putting something up on the website, mostly for the banking community, that says that an LSRP is authorized or can authorize decreases. It's clear that an LSRP can authorize disbursements, assuming that the financial instrument says so. It's not as clear that they can also authorize decreases in the RFS. So we're going to post something to clarify that. Okay, now we're going to talk about increases. So next slide. Okay. If an LSRP, again, does another cost estimate and determines it's going to cost more than initially thought to complete the remediation of the site, the person shall increase the amount of the RFS. And there's 2 ways that might happen. One is, as I said, every year you have to do an annual, you have to submit the form annually, having your cost estimate there. So maybe when you're doing your annual review, you find that you have to increase the cost has gone up. The other way would be maybe during the middle of the year you realize it's going to cost more, like it's not associated with filling out the form, and you realize that it's going to cost more. In that case, the LSRP has to send a written notification to the RP that it's going to cost more, and within 30 days, and it has to copy the department on that, and then within 30 days of that letter going out, the RP has to increase the amount of the RFS to what the LSRP's own estimate is. Okay, next slide. And finally, the other way that we can change the RFS can be changed is it can be the department authorizes the return or the release of the RFS. So, like we were saying, if you substitute one form of RFS for another, they won't release the amount from the original RFS. Another person has established RFS for the person who initially had the RFS. The first person gets their RFS back. The second person has established it. This is not true for self-guarantees. And when everybody wants, you have a full site RAO, and so you are done with the department, at least with the RFS part of the department. When you file the RAO with the department, and when we see that it's been filed, then you can make the request. Well, you can make the request when you file the RAO. And we're going to get something on the web also that is just a form letter that you can just fill out saying, I filed my RAO on this date. It's a full site RAO. Please release, has information about the instrument, and please release it to whoever. In that case, then you get the RFS gets dispersed, the record gets shut, you won't get billed 0.1% anymore. Okay, next slide. Yep, that's what I just was talking about, how you're done and we're going to close it out. Hold up. Release, yes, there we are. No, okay. I just want to remind LSRPs that the RAO cannot be issued, obviously, until the site is protective of human health and the environment, but also until all of the fees and all money that's owing to the department is paid. That includes oversight costs, annual remediation fees, and permit fees. And you can use data miner to determine how to do this. And just a show of hands, how many people know how to use data miner to do it? Does everybody know how to use data miner? Well, most people do. Okay. We can post instructions for how to do it. I was actually going to have like a little bit of a demo, but it would take too long and sort of off topic a little bit. Next slide. So just to get you started, this is the DEP homepage, and lower right is where you click to get into data miner from the get-go. And next slide, substituting the type of RFS. If you want to change out your RFS, you have a remediation trust fund, you want to go to a letter of credit, then you have to, again, submit that remediation cost review and RFS FA form to let us know what's happening, and we'll return the original when we have proof that the new one is in place. We don't want to have a gap between that there's a time when there's no RFS in place. So the proof might be a letter from the bank or the trustee saying that it has been established on this date, or even if it's a couple of days, it will be established on this date. But we just need to know that there's going to be an RFS in place. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it back to Linda, and she is going to have a third party can use RFS, and then get into the financial assurance bit of it as well.
Okay, at this point you might be asking, what's the point of all this? Accounts, financial mechanisms, banks, insurers, decreases, increases, disbursements. So one of the things that I can say to underscore the importance is that when, from the department's perspective, when a party falls out of compliance, we can take this RFS money and use it to finish the cleanup. And this doesn't happen frequently, fortunately, but it does happen, and we have a number of accounts, and one of the things that Karen and I are going to be working on over the next 6 months maybe, will be getting that information together for any of those sites that haven't been already addressed by someone else, making sure that those people know that that money is available. So essentially the way it works is if somebody fails to comply, and this applies for bankruptcy cases as well, somebody files for bankruptcy, we can take that money and use it. Somebody doesn't finish the cleanup, walks away from the site, we can take that money and use it. The rules have a provision where another party, someone other than who posted the remediation funding source, can petition the department to use that. So that's really what we want to encourage is, we don't really want to do it, but if the money's available and someone else is going to clean up the site, you can petition the department to use that money. So the disbursement of that money is at the department's discretion. One policy that we have established is that we won't disperse that money until the remaining costs of the cleanup are less than the amount in that fund. We essentially want this to be the last money spent. We want to make sure that the site just gets cleaned up rather than, this money getting spent and then another party, walking away from the site. So that's that in a nutshell. Okay, so now we're going to transition into a discussion of financial assurance. And one of the questions that these guys have been dealing with a lot is making the transition on a site that has a remediation funding source in place and is now going to a permit and has a requirement to establish financial assurance. So this is the slide that for everybody that's participating via the web, this is the slide that changed from what is in your handout, and it's the first bullet essentially. So if a full site RAO is being issued, there will be no remaining AOCs, so there's no requirement for a remediation funding source to stay in place once the financial assurance is established via the permit. So what should happen in this scenario is the person responsible for conducting remediation can decrease the amount of their remediation funding source so that it's equal to estimated cost for the financial assurance, and then when you submit the permit application, indicate that on the application that you want to use the mechanism that is in existence as a remediation funding source to meet your financial assurance obligations. What we'll do when we get that information is we will close out the RFS record, so you'll no longer get charged your 1% surcharge, and we'll then start tracking it as financial assurance. And so basically, you don't have to change the mechanism. You just have to make sure it's the right amount, say this is what I want to use to meet this requirement, and we'll make it happen behind the scenes. Okay. So that's on a site where the RAO is for the whole site. If the RAO is for AOC only, it's a little bit more complicated because in this scenario, you have to maintain RFS to cover any remaining AOCs that aren't the subject of an RAO and establish financial assurance for the AOCs that are going to be covered by the permit. So you need to establish a separate instrument for the FA. Next slide is you can't use a self-guarantee for financial assurance. So if your RFS is in the form of self-guarantee, you definitely have to get a separate instrument anyway, regardless of whether it's full site or an RAO specific. Okay, so for financial assurance, who must establish financial assurance? Permittees who are implementing a remedial action that requires an engineering control. There are some exemptions that we'll get to in just a minute. Next slide. The financial assurance has to be in an amount that's equal to the cost estimate for the duration of the engineering controls. If the duration is indeterminate, in other words, you're putting a cap on the site and that cap's going to be there forever, you can use 30 years for purposes of establishing the amount. But if it's a pump and treat that you expect to operate for 10 years, your cost estimate should be for the 10 years that you expect to have that engineering control in place. Funds can't be dispersed from the financial assurance to conduct O&M. There is a provision in the rules that allows condo associations to demonstrate that they've met the financial assurance requirement by proving that they have budgeted for it on an annual basis. And then the last one there, as I mentioned before, and as Karen mentioned, you don't have to pay a surcharge on the amount of financial assurance. So some of the things that, and we have had a guidance document for the development of cost estimates in the work for quite some time. It's probably 90% there. Not a lot of internal expertise on development of costs, so we're kind of struggling a little bit with it. What I want to do is get it out there sort of in draft and have all you experts kind of weigh in on that. So that hopefully will happen soon. But one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of just mention some things that you should include in your cost estimate for financial assurance, and that would be the cost to inspect, maintain, operate, and repair your engineering controls, cost to prepare your biennial certifications, and your annual permit fees. They should all be included in your financial assurance because that's the cost really to maintain your engineering control. This is, I think, pretty much the same as for remediation funding source. If there's a desire to substitute one form for another, submit the new one and we'll return the old one, right? Okay. When will we release or return a financial assurance mechanism? Three scenarios that we could account for. A permittee has substituted another form, which just was covered on the prior slide. Another permittee has established financial assurance instead. Or the third scenario is that the department has amended the remedial action permit because the engineering control is no longer necessary. Again, the example that I gave was you have an active pump and treat system. You get to the point where it's reduced contaminant levels to the point where natural attenuation is the appropriate remedy for the rest of the duration of the cleanup. Since the engineering control is no longer necessary, the permit can be amended and the financial assurance can be released. Okay, the financial assurance, there are some exemptions for financial assurance. Government entities do not have to establish financial assurance. Some Spill Act, some non-Spill Act liable parties. So let me read this right from the rules, which I'm pretty sure mimic the statute. A person who is not otherwise liable under the Spill Act purchased the property before May 7th of 2009 and who is remediating or has remediated. Those parties are exempt from establishing financial assurance. Parties conducting remediation at their primary or secondary residence, at a school or a child care center, and finally the next one is on the next slide. That would be small businesses, and Karen included a definition of small businesses to help you understand the scope of that. This one comes up once in a while. This is sometimes we will get, what is this? Oh, I have the brain freeze for a minute here. We will get a party who doesn't have the money to establish, this is RFS, why is it here? That's why I'm confused.
That is why, because I did get it.
Oh, because this is miscellaneous. Okay, I guess that means we're at the end. We're very close to the end. Okay, now I'm clear. Sometimes a party will be closing on a property, transfer the property. They don't have the money that they need to establish RFS. This would be, say, an ISRA scenario where they have an obligation to post the RFS, but they don't have it. They'll get it once they sell the property. We can make arrangements so that they submit evidence that there is a trustee willing to receive that, and within 5 days we get, so it's not like you always have to have it ahead of time. We can work with the parties if it has to happen as part of the, establishing the RFS has to happen as part of the transaction. So, in spite of Karen's efforts, I figured it out. Next slide is contact information with, repeat again the corrected phone number for the people that are on the web. It's 609-633-1464 for my number. I think all the other contact information is right. There's Karen's, mine. The next page is Audrey Comfort's, Gina, and Shauna's contact information. The next page after that, and actually we should talk about this a little, Wayne Howitz is hiding in the back. Wayne and Bob Sobolewski currently manage the remedial action permit sections. So financial assurance stuff is really in their shop. We have some effort that we're making for coordination to streamline tracking and things like that. So here are the contacts for Bob and Wayne's group for the Bureau of Remedial Action Permits. If you have questions about a permit, that's who to talk to. We have a links and resources page with some links to the quick reference guides. There is one there for RFS and FA. You may be familiar with the other quick reference guides for timeframes and for a whole bunch of things. There's a link to where you can find the forms. And there is a link to the, is that the models, Karen? The model documents for each of the acceptable types of remediation funding sources and financial. And that is the end. Questions? Oh, we have some questions.
I know that the regulation states that you can only disperse from the RFS on a quarterly basis, but I assume there are some that you can make disbursements from course that will be incurred, projected to be incurred, because this occurs up very frequently in final projects for trust funds. In other words, is it possible to say necessary within a quarter of the period that you say expenses or disbursements and you see within the name of this time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
That sort of answered one question I have. So there are small entities that are responsible for ISRA sites, and some of these folks have remediation trust funds that the LSRP coming on board discovers magically are vastly underfunded. And so we're, as sort of guardians for the state's financial resources, essentially, not just the environmental health and safety, we're responsible to make that happen, to transition that. When you find that situation and everything you know from the client or what they've asserted is that they don't have the money. There may even be an insurance company that has, say, half of the liability, but the client doesn't have the other 50%. Does that just, by definition, kind of mean this is something that has to head to enforcement, or is there a way that we can come in and discuss it?
Right. I think that the LSRP's responsibility is really to come up with an accurate estimate of costs and advise the client of what those costs are, and make sure that they're aware that they have to adjust their remediation funding source. If that party then wants to make the argument that they can't afford it, they will have that discussion with us. At that point, the LSRP doesn't really have a role in that. We have deal with people all the time who want to make sort of a hardship plea. We also have procedures in place where if someone wants to meet their remediation funding source obligations by making claims against their insurance, we have a way to do that. So they would have to provide proof that they've gone to a financial institution and been denied to establish their remediation funding source.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very helpful. I can resume sleeping at night.
All right, we have some questions on the web. Do we have any? Please repeat the questions. They're not all being picked up on the mic. Okay, Rob. Financial assurance is for O&M of engineering control, but on some slides it said FA funds cannot be used for O&M. Please clarify. I think the point that we were trying to make where we said FA funds can't be used for O&M, you can't draw down on your financial assurance to fund your O&M. Because those costs are set. The minute you start drawing down, you're out of compliance because you don't have enough to last your 30 years. So whereas RFS, if you have an accurate cost estimate and you say it's going to be $500,000, as you proceed to do the cleanup, the costs go down. So you can use those funds to actually fund the cleanup. And so that's the difference. In fact, there's going to be a change to the rule because right now, under the disbursement section, it makes it sound like you can use financial assurance to fund your O&M, and that's incorrect. So that's being changed in the next proposal. There's a question, are nonprofits exempt? No. From financial assurance? I don't think they're exempt from either. I don't think so.
They don't think so.
No.
Okay, here we go. Do we simultaneously submit the remediation cost review form with the soil remedial action permit application package, or is this an independent submission that must precede the permit application submittal? This is a permit question, so I'm kind of glad Wayne's here, but I think that they come in together, right, Wayne? Hold on, Wayne. Now he's going to do his lounge lizard act. He has a microphone. Watch out.
Hey, anybody here from out of town? No, to answer the question, you need to establish your financial assurance at the time you apply for the permit, so it's going to come in as one package. So you do your cost estimate, you do your cost estimate ahead of time, establish the financial assurance, and then apply for the permit, and then it's all one package. Any questions?
That was nice and clear, and you wouldn't have, if you were, as I said earlier, if you wanted to use your remediation funding source to if it was all of your AOCs had been addressed and you were going to use your existing remediation funding source as your financial assurance, then you wouldn't have to establish a new one. You would just say that in your permit application.
Correct.
And you would make the changes on our end. Good. All right. Can RFS funds be reimbursed for work already completed? Are you asking for disbursement from a remediation funding source? It's going to be hard for them to. Yes, I think the way that this is worded, it makes it sound like they're asking, can RFS funds be reimbursement for work already completed? Can you disperse from a remediation funding source account for work you already completed? Or can they reduce the amount of funds that are being held for work that's completed? And the answer to that would be yes. Based on an updated cost estimate, yes. Yes, okay. Can you address payment of administrative costs such as tax preparation and bank trust fees? I believe that there's a definition in the rules that indicates what remediation costs are, and certain administrative costs are allowed and other remediation costs or other administrative costs are not. I would say, look at the definition. You want to add anything to that? Okay. If you cannot use FA funds for O&M, how is paid? Well, if you were to use you have to have another source of funding. Essentially, the financial assurance is meant to guarantee that amount of funding is going to be there to maintain the engineering control. Okay. Anybody else in the room? Anybody? Okay. The amount of RFS and FA must reflect the cost of the remediation. What all costs be included? Should O&M be included? So yes, there's a little bit of confusion over how this is worded in the rules. So I don't have it in front of me, but I'll take a shot at it. Okay, I'll take a shot at it anyway. Remediation funding source is established up front, either because you have an ACO that requires it, or you get to the point of a remedial action work plan for an ISR case, and so you have to develop a cost estimate and establish a remediation trust fund or a remediation funding source for that. So it's sort of up front. You're far from the permit at that point. It has to be for the full cost of remediation, and I recognize that is very hard to do early on. Take your best shot. Look at how big your site is. Look at what the plans are for the use of the property when all is said and done. Is there going to be a building on top of it, a parking lot on top of it? What's the likelihood that somebody's going to clean up to unrestricted standards? Or are they probably just going to go and cap it and have a deed notice? So you have to take that into account when you do those upfront cost estimates. Along those lines, we have surrogate amounts that can be used for cases where you have an obligation to post a remediation funding source, but you don't know anything about the site. $100,000 if you have soil contamination, $250,000 for groundwater contamination. Those can be used across the board without even doing a PASI if time is of the essence. And then within 30 days of completing the PASI,
an updated and more accurate cost estimate has to be finished, has to be completed, and the RFS has to be adjusted. I have an old ISRA case with an existing RFS. Do I need to file an RFS cost review form each year, and when is it initially required? You need to do a cost review annually from the date that the initial RFS was required to be established. So when you say an old ISRA case, that could mean when you signed a remediation agreement and the remediation agreement required it, so that would be the anniversary date on which the cost review is due, or approval of remedial action work plan is the other trigger for cases that don't involve a transaction. So yes, they're due annually. Okay.
And you have to submit the form as well, not just do the review.
Correct. Do the form and submit the review. Where was that question? I think you need to go down a little. I thought there was something. When it's initially, okay, and it's initially required either as in the document, as I said, if it's an ACO, or the rules requires it 14 days after a remedial action work plan. I think that was in the presentation. Yeah. Okay, if I file a TIN, a remediation certification form, an RFS cost form, and the LSRP retention form with documentation that RFS has been established, can I close the ISRA subject transaction the same day that the forms are filed? Same day might be a little ambitious. I mean, we try to help people, but same day might be a little ambitious. If we know about it ahead of time and everything came in perfect, I don't know. Same day is. All right. Let's go down a little more. We missed one? Wait, which one? The one that's highlighted right there? You want me to read that one? The one that's highlighted? Okay. We included that one. I thought we did that. That's remediation. What's the amount? The amount of the RFFA must reflect the cost of remediation. We read that one. Yeah. Okay. Are remediation cost review forms required annually or with the biennial certifications? They are required annually. Okay. Right. But okay, next, for financial assurance, cost review. Oh, I think that's the second part of the question. And there's no more? Come on, you guys. You have all the experts here for a few more minutes. I'm ignoring people in the room. Hold on. I have to give it to Luke first. There we go.
Linda, have you considered in terms of establishing reinforcing costing factors in standard estimating tables like LSRPs and stuff like that, rather than trying to look it up on your own?
That's where we need help, exactly. We don't want to get crazy about this because, it's up to you guys to come up with the cost estimate. But what we want to do is, it's more to provide what do you need to submit to us to support the costs that you've developed, so that when we get these situations where somebody has a $4 million, I just saw one today, $2 million RFS established, and they're coming in reducing it to $500,000. So just, it was very minimal documentation. It kind of makes us go, really? Like, what? And I realize that can happen, but normally I would be expecting it to go the other way. Somebody had a surrogate amount of $100,000, never raised it, and is, completing an RI for what is clearly a $5 million cleanup. That's what I expect to see more often, is the dollar amounts going the other way.
So not consider creating a smaller group, a subset of the LSRPs or the consultants to help with this before you release it to post-security?
That's what I would like to do. I haven't even really gotten to the point to raise it yet, and I expect the question that will be, the counter question will be, maybe this is something that LSRPA should be doing for their members to help. But there's still the issue of what do we want to see? What we need to give guidance for what we expect to support the estimates. So Right now, we're getting, it's running amok. It's, it's everything from a pretty table with like 3 rows that are so general that you can't really tell. So it needs some work.
Can you update the financial assurance cost estimate over time to reduce it as you expend O&M funds? You can't draw down money off the financial assurance for the O&M funds. Can you update that cost estimate to reduce it as your O&M costs go down over time?
Wayne's standing up. I think he wants to take that one.
No. Okay. Remember that financial assurance is established for the life of the engineering control. Now, assuming I'm going to be able to draw down on that, or reduce the amount, let's say that I established $70,000 in year 1. 10 years later, I want to drop that down to $20,000. The engineering control is going to remain in place after 30 years. You've got to maintain that financial assurance for the duration of that, for the life of that engineering control, which will go beyond 30 years. But we're costing it out to be similar to EPA and some of the other government agencies of how we establish financial assurance over a 30-year period.
How about we can have engineering controls for that ground?
Repeat that.
Where we'll get rid of the engineering control.
The comment was if you have an engineering control for a groundwater system, and over a period of time, those costs are going to drop out. So let's again use a similar example, $30,000 established year 1, year 10, I no longer need that engineering control. I'm going to go to national attenuation. I'm going to monitor after that. So yeah, you can drop it at that point. This year, the engineering control is no longer used, not until then.
So back on an RFS, costs, estimating costs for remediation is always a tricky business up to and including after an RAW has been developed. So there's a great deal of uncertainty remaining. And so the need to update the surrogate, the RFS to use a different amount than the surrogate, for instance, immediately after doing a PASI. I guess I'm just expressing a lack of understanding about how is that to be done. The LSRP bears the responsibility for that. Of course, it can be updated as additional phases of work go on, but I'm not sure how accurate are those expected to be. If, for instance, say a situation goes on where an LSRP updates one, and the responsible party stops performing the remediation, and it's later found out that it's an entirely different amount. It's, no RI was done. What are we held to? There's no real history of this, I guess. So it's.
I think that you need to do the best that you can with the information that you have. That's why it's updated annually. As you develop more information, you have to update it. So, you finish your PASI, you know that you now have 4 AOCs or 1 AOC. You know what, essentially, generally your RI costs, you know how many wells you're probably going to put in, at least in the first phase. I mean, a lot of it, I agree, is based on your experience and based on your best estimation with the data that you have.
Just as an example, though, as a consultant, if a client ever asks me at the end of the SI how much the remediation is going to cost, I won't answer the question. So it's a little unrealistic. That's just commentary I'll provide. Let's say Israel is triggered by a cessation of operation, but there's no sale or transaction on the horizon. When does the RFS have to be established in that case?
Within 14 days after the LSRPA certifies the remedial action work plan. So at that point, hopefully costs for the rest of the cleanup would be a little bit more firm.
Okay, thank you.
if you have if you start this landscape, you have experience. Do you put your landscape to just stay over here, or what?
If you want to disperse from the line of credit, you mean?
Yeah.
The rules include a list of once you've changed the model document to allow the LSRP to disperse the money directly, you would submit to the financial institution a request for that disbursement, and then you copy the department, and you have to include what's on the form and in the rules as far as what the money was spent on and what the new amount posted is.
Okay, thanks. There's a question on practicality of those disbursements on the RFS. Let's say we estimate that it's going to be a $50,000 expenditure over the next 3 months, and it's going to include the level of a tank. And the hole gets open, and we discover that we have 8 tanks, and we have 20,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil in addition. It's a hard sell to a contractor at that stage to say, hey, can you finish the work? They only have 90 days. There has to be a practical way for the LSRP at that stage to come back, or the consultant for that matter, to come back and say, okay, let's continue with this work, let's go be efficient, and yeah, we'll pay you in 30 days. How we learn more?
The 3-month limit has been in the rules for a long time. That's not new, and that seems like it's working. I mean, it seems. But if there's a scenario where it doesn't work, I mean, I guess call us and we'll see what we can do. If you're going directly to a financial institution, they might not care if it's more frequently than 3 months in an emergency situation, right? I mean, we did it basically so people weren't coming back every week asking for more money, given our resources that we have to constantly approve these disbursements.
It might be something that we need to change in the rules, if this is something that comes up often. Right now, the rules are very clear that it can only be every 3 months, and I don't know whether when the rules, obviously when the rules were written, there wasn't a thought that LSRPs would be authorizing the disbursement. I mean, I think probably what was envisioned is that the person responsible for conducting remediation would lay out that money, and then, after the fact, be reimbursed from the RFS.
Well, the way to handle it, you have a way to handle it in the sense that you can,
You, to a certain extent, have a way of handling it because you do allow projections for the future. In other words, you can disperse for what you anticipate the cost will be in the next quarter. So before you do the work, if you have a proposal or a budget established, you ought to be able to disperse through that. They all need to be spent in the future. So there is a way, what you've told us, there's a way of dealing with that problem. It isn't an ongoing thing. The legislature only provides for it on an ongoing basis.
Right, and I guess, to your point, make your estimate for what you need in the future, but you come across something you couldn't anticipate and costs go up.
well, there's no way to deal with that.
Right.
Going back to the web,
And then George.
is that right? The RRP cost review is subject to review and be overturned by the department. Is there an appeal process? Do you ever tell the LSRP that they're way off? We've had a couple that didn't look right to us, and we are looking at these. For the most part, we're going to rely on the professional expertise of the LSRPs pretty heavily, but we will be auditing a portion of these. We will be, especially, until we get our ducks in a row with what kind of information is to come in to support it. I think Comfort had one the other day where, it just did not add up. So we definitely are looking at these. As far as, is there a process for them to appeal? There's not anything in place right now. I think would you change it unilaterally, or you don't know? If we think there's an issue with the cost estimate, you'll definitely know. We'll definitely have a discussion and try to understand why you think the cost estimate is what you've submitted. So that would be a discussion at that point.
Okay, George?
Many of us need proposals together to cover the unknown of building contingency factors. Would the department accept contingency factors when it's asking for disbursements, such as a 25% for the unknown?
If
If it's something that,
I mean, we are relying on you guys to be paying for this and doing it right, and so I can't imagine why we...
I think it's reasonable, especially if it's something that you normally do when you're pricing things out anyway. Hopefully, your original amount of RFS included that contingency, and it's there, the money is there, so. Another one from the web. Do you send an approval of the RFS that I should wait for before closing the transaction? What approval should I wait for? How long does it take? Meaning they submit what they think it should be. Are you talking about the cost estimate or the actual RFS instrument? It says approval of the RFS.
No, either.
we don't approve either, so
If the question is either, do we approve the remediation certification, and then you can proceed, you can't proceed with your transaction until you get an approval for us for the remediation certification, we're not approving them. And the same thing with if you want to disperse the money, that's up to the LSRP, if you have the correct document, and if you have a trust fund or a line of credit. So no, you don't have to wait for approvals.
And if there's something wrong with your remediation funding source mechanism, you'll get a call from Audrey or Comfort.
To fix it.
Yes. Right. Okay, what type of insurance products are there for establishing financial assurance? Do you guys know this?
okay, no, go ahead.
Hold on, we have help from the crowd.
It's not much help, just based upon my own experience. So I imagine in the past been able to get insurance policies to cover RFS, but not recently, and I'm not aware of any carrier right now that's writing this kind of coverage. I know it may be out there. The last time I did it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I understand that I was one of probably about 5 people in the state that did it that way. So I don't offer much work for people that are getting an insurance policy.
My understanding was that they were not widely available. I don't know whether for financial assurance, whether your experience is any different, Wayne?
From the permitting side, I think we've seen one out of all the financial assurance that's been established. Mostly it's trust funds, line of credit, letter of credit, but again, we haven't seen any bonding insurance policies.
In my limited time dealing with this, I've had I have gotten calls from people and then insurance companies saying that this is really hard, this type of insurance policy is really hard to get, but I don't know if anybody is on the webinar from the insurance industry. I was kind of hoping people from banking and insurance might be there, and if there is, if they could type in an answer, that'd be appreciated. That's it.
Another question, once the RFS forms are submitted, how much time would it take for it to be approved? But you just said you don't approve them, but how much time should they give for, you to accept the system, I guess? I don't know how backlog varies, but it's not huge, right? Right, if it's complete, that's a good point. If it's incomplete, these guys will get back to you. If it's complete, it takes a few days. A week or two? A week or two at the most? Okay, a week or two at the most, okay. To whom should a third-party petition for reimbursement from an RFS be directed? You can direct that to me, to Linda Gray site. I include the PI for the site that is the subject of the remediation. And we're going to get procedures out soon, hopefully, for what a person has to submit to make the case that we should disperse those funds. Okay, I guess this is a follow-up question from the one above. They're saying that it would take a couple of weeks for the acceptance of, or whatever, the RFS to be they could check it out on data miner a couple weeks, right? If they process, I mean, do you guys put anything in NGEMS?
We put things in NGEMS, but not, I don't know that it shows up on data miner.
Yeah, I'm not sure really whether there's data miner reports that reflect, I don't know whether there's data miner reports that reflect the amount of RFS. We probably should develop them if they don't exist already, so we can work on that.
Anybody else? Oh, Jeff, people want to go home. Jeff?
We're going to the minutes, and then it's going to be recorded to answer some of this. I'm going to get back to the financial insurance because this is what we're going to get displaced from it. When you mentioned we're going to do the same thing, we would also produce consistency for financial insurance, utilities inspections, binding certifications, and then we're agency to control, using control. So if you're going to say you need to have duration control, and you into it 15 years, by the time you could have taken 15 biennial inspections, the 7 biennial inspections, which could cost around about 40,000 each. If you're not able to dispose of it, you're going to the club because that money is expended, it's very accessible. So why is there reason to expect, if you're applying that concept to remediation, it can't be applied to money that you don't need to preserve from the last 15 years of the implementation of internal control?
Well, if you think of this in terms of the engineering control is going to, I'm not talking about groundwater, I'm talking about a cap. That's going to be there forever. We're allowing you to use the cost for 30 years of that. So if you look at it that way, if you use up, you're 15 years in, you want to reduce it because you're thinking, oh, I only have 15 more years of this. You don't only have 15 more years of this. You have forever. We're allowing you to just post 30 years worth. Does that help? Okay.
Just add to this comment is, you say it's additional monies. You already saved additional monies by going with engineering control. You also have a choice to remediate the site to unrestricted standards. So essentially, you save money there. You're applying money to your financial assurance, and that's for protection of the engineering institutional control.
And this is something that you guys should be considering when you're evaluating what remedy to put in place. Does it make more sense to tell your client it's going to cost more now, but it's going to save you in the long run because otherwise, assuming you're going to continue to own this property and be the permittee, the primary permittee, you're going to have this cost of $50,000 a year for the rest of it. So, it's something that you guys have to take into account and make your clients understand that those costs are ongoing.
All right, I think we're going to thank all of our speakers tonight. They did a great job. And all you guys on the web and all the contact information if you have other questions. But thanks for participating. Okay, thank you.